Welcome to Cursed and Curious. I am Beth, your guide through ghost stories, internet oddities, and the kind of unsettling little moments that you can't quite explain, but also can't quite forget. I'm so glad you found your way here, whether you're listening while you're doing your makeup, walking the dog, hiding under a blanket, or trying to convince yourself that creaky floorboard noise was definitely just the wind. You're in good company. Each week, I pull together stories that live in the shadows, ear encounters, strange true tales, haunted whispers from Reddit, and sometimes things that have happened way too close to home. Some are funny, some are freaky, and a few might stick with you long after the episode's finished. And this week's a little different because I've just come back from a paranormal investigation, so later on I'll be sharing a little peek at what happened, what I heard, and what I'm still trying to explain. But first, it's story time. So lean in, listen closely. Something wants to be heard. This story is one of the heavier ones I've come across. Not because it's dramatic or flashy, but because of how long it went on. We're talking years of the same presence. Quiet at first, then louder, then constant. It was originally posted by someone who grew up in a house where something just didn't feel right, and over time that something started to show itself. What's wild is how gradually it all unfolds. At first, you might think it's just a string of weird coincidences until it starts to feel more like a pattern, and eventually a presence. Before we get into it, I do want to give a heads up. This story includes mentions of mental health struggles, self-harm, and a suicide attempt. If any of those topics feel too heavy for you right now, please feel free to skip ahead or come back when you're in the right headspace. This is Haunted for 15 years. It all started when my brother, father, and I moved into a house. It was a 3-story building with 2 apartments on each floor. The house was over 100 years old, but well renovated. It sat across the street from my new school and was surrounded by a beautiful park. Honestly, an amazing place to grow up. I was 5, maybe 6 at the time. Back then, I noticed a lot of shadows in the corner of my eye. This went on for 10 years before I realised it wasn't just a normal eye thing. As a kid, I was incredibly afraid of the dark. I had this irrational fear that Batman was going to be standing in my room when I opened my eyes, and he was going to kill me. Looking back, that imagined version of Batman, tall, shadowy, and silently threatening, might have been my mind's way of sensing what was really there all along. I've always been extremely sensitive to energy and the paranormal, so I think I already sensed something back then, I just didn't know what it was. Even as a kid, I was already dealing with depression and insomnia. There was a lot going on at home, and all of that definitely played a part in what came next. By the time I was around 12, my mental health had started to drastically decline. I began self-harming, and my insomnia worsened. After finishing high school at 15, my sleep cycle was beyond repair. I was often awake all night and sleeping during the day. Sometimes not sleeping at all. I was constantly sleep deprived. That's when things really started to get strange. Objects would disappear and reappear months later. Things would randomly fall off the shelves. It was small stuff, harmless even, but definitely not normal. I started hearing voices, yelling or whispering my name. It was usually the voice of my dad or my brother, but when I checked, they weren't home, or they were asleep, and it got worse. I can't even remember the order things happened. There was just so much. There were the sounds, gurgling like someone being choked, coming from the middle of our living room. Strange music that would wake me up, always coming from the corner of my room, fading in and out. Knocking on the walls, always 3 times. Horrible screeching sounds, loud, twisted, and demonic sounding, like something out of a nightmare. Footsteps, mainly from the attic right above us, and sometimes it sounded like someone was throwing furniture around up there. loud crashes and thuds in the middle of the night. By that time, I already knew our house was haunted. I just didn't know what we were dealing with. So my friend Natasha and I decided to investigate. She lived nearby, just across the street, actually. And we'd grown up together. We were the same age. And she had an older brother named Peter, who was my brother's age. We realised that they both had experienced this entity even before I moved in. It had started out in their guest room and later made its way into ours. I could never step foot into ours. The presence was overwhelming. It felt like the air was crushing you. After it started focusing on me, I carried that same sensation with me constantly for about a year. It was like someone standing right behind you with a knife at your back. I'm sure some of you know exactly what I mean. So I made a mistake. I tried to communicate with it. I gave it attention. I thought it was a ghost. And that was when everything escalated. Fast. It completely attached itself to me. I later learned that I'd become an ideal target, constantly surrounded by fear, sadness, and anger, which is exactly the kind of energy they thrive on. I was the perfect victim. One night I saw what looked like a black silhouette of a cat jump off my bed. It disappeared in mid-air, not like it ran away, but it evaporated into smoke. I turned, sensing something behind me, and then I saw it. It was the first time I saw it clearly. What many people would call a shadow person. Some might say hat man. I've heard other terms. Mine had no hat, no face, no hands, no feet, not even a proper head, just a 2-meter tall black figure filled with thick, smoky shadow. It stared into my soul with non-existent eyes. I froze, completely, and just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished again. After that, it became a mind game. That was the peak of the haunting. I started researching what it could be. Shadow people, demons, anything that might explain what I had seen. The more I read, the more it lined up with everything I'd experienced. I'd never been afraid of darkness before. Not really. I welcomed it. Because of my depression and suicidal thoughts, fear wasn't something that stuck around for long. But after that night, I could barely stand to be in the dark. I would cry when the lights were off, and it knew that. It started breaking our light bulbs. Every 2 days or so, one would shatter, and we didn't always have the money to replace them right away. I was always the one awake at night, so I had to deal with it. He was active during the day too, but between 2 and 4 a.m, that was when it was worst. One time, I walked into the kitchen and stepped on something squishy. When I turned on the light, the floor was covered in maggots. Every inch. I panicked, crying, trying to clean them up and throw them away. After a few minutes, they just disappeared into the walls. There weren't even cracks. It made no sense. Another time, I tried reasoning with it. I spent the whole day speaking into thin air, acknowledging its presence, trying to calm things down. That night, I asked out loud, "I've given you attention all day. Please just let me sleep tonight." The shift in the room was instant. The air turned heavy, the atmosphere tense. Then I felt it, something tightening around my throat. The pressure stayed for a few minutes, pressing down until I could hardly breathe. That was the only physical attack I've ever experienced. They don't usually want to hurt us physically. It's counterproductive, but they will if it helps them break us. And I was already broken. At that point, I was barely functioning. I was exhausted all the time, terrified, and running on no sleep. Eventually, I found a paranormal forum online and connected with someone who offered to help. He was gifted, magically talented, able to astral project and do things I don't fully understand. He helped weaken the demon, and for a while, it stopped. Years passed with only minor incidents, but it was still there. I could feel it. Always, like a heavy shadow on my emotions. It followed me everywhere and made life incredibly difficult. At 16, I attempted suicide. There were a lot of factors contributing to that, but I strongly believe the overwhelming negativity and emotional weight this entity brought into my life played a significant part. This experience was incredibly traumatic, like living in a horror film. Besides my friends in the building, no one believed me. My dad didn't take me seriously. My brother knew something was happening, but he was scared, so he ignored it and left me alone with it. There were so many more things that happened, but I can't list them all here. The post is long enough already. Not long after the suicide attempt, I went to a clinic and met my future best friend. We tried communicating with the entity again, this time through a Ouija board. It rarely gave clear answers. I realised later that they tell you anything you want to hear, and you can't believe a word of it. Over time, I developed a strange mental connection with him. It wasn't healthy. It felt like being in a toxic relationship you couldn't escape. 2 years ago, things started picking up again. It had been quieter for a while, but that didn't last. I went to bed one night. My boyfriend was already lying beside me. I turned off the lights and closed my eyes. Then opened them again and noticed the light in the living room was on. Right as I looked, the light turned off. It waited for me to see. It used to do that years ago. It was one of its habits. It might sound harmless, but I knew immediately it was back. I shook violently from fear for hours. My boyfriend had to calm me down. So I reached out to the same friend who had helped me before. Over the course of a few months, we developed a plan to trap the entity in an object, but he ended up going behind my back and doing something even riskier. It worked. As far as I can tell, the demon is gone for good. I don't feel him anymore. The connection is severed, and I think I'm finally free. Whew, that one really sticks with you, doesn't it? There's just something about the slow creeping build of this one, starting with shadows and whispers and then turning into something that's always there, always watching. It's not one of those one-off weird moment stories. This was someone's life for years. That's what makes it feel so heavy and unsettling, without ever feeling over the top, which honestly is what makes it feel real to me. What really hit me was how openly she talked about her mental health, and not in a way that undermines the story either. If anything, it adds to it, because this idea that people who are already feeling vulnerable or broken or just low might attract things like this, that comes up a lot when you start looking into these kinds of cases, and she was right in the middle of all of that. She shares a few signs at the end of her post too. We didn't read them in the main story, but I wanted to mention them because they're pretty telling. Stuff like seeing black shadows in the corner of your eye, hearing 3 knocks, and that crushing, watchful energy that makes your skin crawl. And her biggest piece of advice: do not engage. Do not react. Do not feed it. Which, easier said than done, right? But it makes sense. She said even fear gives it something to work with, and weirdly, that's advice I've heard in other stories too. Whether you believe it or not, the idea that ignoring it might be your best defense is kind of chilling in itself. She also mentioned, and I think it's really important, that she'd been tested for schizophrenia and psychosis. She wasn't trying to convince anyone of anything. She just wanted to put it out there in case somebody else is going through something similar and doesn't know where to turn. And that honesty, that vulnerability, that's why I wanted to share this one with you. So yeah, after all that, maybe take a deep breath, shake it off, because we're not done yet. For this episode's folklore story, we're heading to Lincolnshire, and specifically to the village of Epworth. Now, this one isn't just a bit of local gossip or a spooky tale passed down at the pub, it's actually tied to one of the most documented hauntings in early modern England, which honestly, kind of wild. And the spirit at the heart of it, he's known affectionately and a little nervously as Old Geoffrey. Back in the early 1700s, the Wesley family moved into a rectory in Epworth, a sleepy little village surrounded by farmland. Samuel Wellesley was the rector, and his family, including his son John, who would later go on to found what would become the Methodist Church, all lived there together. At first, everything was fine, but not for long. Strange noises started, soft knocks at first, then footsteps, and then full-on banging in the middle of the night. They tried to ignore it, but eventually it was impossible to pretend nothing was going on. So they gave it a name, Old Geoffrey. I'm sure that sounds kind of quaint, but what they experienced was anything but. Doors slammed shut on their own. Objects were thrown. The children were terrified. Samuel's wife, Susanna, said she felt someone pull her hair while she was in bed. One of the daughters even claimed to have seen a figure in a long, dark robe glide across the hallway. No face, just the robe. Even John Wesley, known later for being calm and collected, was rattled by it. He returned to Epworth years later and still talked about the feeling that something had been there with them. Something they couldn't see. Some people have said it was just classic poltergeist activity. Others think it might have been a restless monk, maybe one displaced during the Reformation, still tied to the land. Whatever it was, it clearly made itself known, and it stuck around long enough to become part of the family's daily life. The haunting lasted so long and was so disruptive that the Wesleys actually documented it. Everything. Letters, journals, full records of what they experienced. And those still exist. Was it a monk, a spirit with a grudge, just a noisy house with too many creaks? We'll never really know. But I love stories like this, where the line between folklore and lived experience gets blurry. Old Geoffrey isn't just a rumour, he's written down, logged, remembered. And that's the part that gets me. Let's leave Old Geoffrey to get back to his mischief. We've still got more to cover today. As you know, I host for Paranormal Presence Investigations, and last weekend we ran an event I'd been looking forward to for a while. So to close out today's episode, let's take a little detour from the stories and step into something a bit more personal. What actually happened when I spent the night inside a very old, very haunted building. This one took place at Middleton Hall, a gorgeous but seriously eerie building tucked away in the countryside. We were there with a group of guests, and let's just say things started happening before the investigation even properly began. Here's what went down. So before the guests arrived, we did a walkthrough of the building with the caretaker, just getting a feel for the space, seeing which rooms we could get into, and figuring out where our vigils would be. I was taking photos as we went, mostly of the building itself. In the parlour, right in front of the dollhouse, I snapped a few in quick succession, and in the first two there's this solid black shadow that seems to move through the frame, but it's completely gone in the rest. Later on, upstairs in the original part of the building, I did the same thing, a burst of shots, and in just one photo, there's another black shadow on the right hand side. Nothing in the one before it, nothing in the one after. Just there, then gone. Once the event properly started, we kicked off the first vigil in what used to be the old part of the house. Part of it is now a gift shop. We set up some EMF cat balls, the teddy bear, the usual kit, and started calling out. Almost straight away, a few people in the group said they felt something hanging back by the stairs, like a presence that didn't want to come down. We also heard a weird little noise that sounded like a xylophone, which made no sense at all. We couldn't find anything around us that could have made that sound. Now, one guest said they had been pushed, and not long after that, another person felt like someone was playing with their hair. She moved across the room just in case it was a draft, but it kept happening. At one point we asked aloud if it could touch her again, and it did, almost straight away. Then we headed upstairs into one of the bedrooms, but that was quiet. So we moved into another room, I think it used to be a kitchen, and we started getting some EMF spikes when we were asked questions. A couple of women also said they felt the hair being touched in there too. And to wrap that vigil up, we went into a small storage space. We still had some EMF activity, but not much else was going on. As we were heading to our next vigil space, upstairs in the main house, the guests who said they were pushed earlier suddenly said their back was burning. When we checked, there were 3 very clear scratch marks across their back, and that burning feeling didn't go away. They said it lasted for the rest of the night. In the parlour, we had a few guests try a Ouija board. It started off slow, but then when they asked who we were talking to, the planchette moved towards the side of the board that was closest to the window. And right at that moment, we heard a tap on the glass. Later, we spotted a plaque on the windowsill with the family name DeHamel on it. When asked for a name, the board pointed them to D a few times, and when asked for an age, it moved between 4 and 5. We moved to a bigger room down the corridor to keep going, and we still felt like we might be talking to a child spirit. We got a few responses, light knocks and some EMF, but nothing major. The next room, the bike room, didn't really give us anything. That one was pretty flat. So we ended the night downstairs in the main building using the Estes method. If you've never come across this before, it's where one person wears a blindfold and noise-cancelling headphones connected to a spirit box, so they can only hear the audio feed and can't see or hear the questions being asked. The idea is to strip away any influence or expectations, and this part, let's just say it got interesting. At first it felt like we were still talking to the little girl. The name Sophie came through, then the number 19, something about water, and something else about the Queen visiting, which, yeah, bit of a curveball. Then the vibe shifted, like properly shifted. Something else started coming through, something not so friendly. Anytime the women in the room asked a question, the only response was shush. It kept repeating the name of the person wearing the headphones, and at one point it said something would happen at 12:30, and that it was going to follow us home. When we asked for its name, it wouldn't give one, and when we pressed a little bit, it came back with pushy. While that was happening, I suddenly got this really sharp, burning, stabbing feeling in my hip. As I said it out loud to the group, we got a response through the speaker saying, "That's me." It started talking about the upstairs again, saying it was going to make itself known, and then, "You saw me earlier," which might link back to those shadow photos I took before the night even started. And while all that was happening, the EMF and the teddy bear were both lighting up completely unprompted. It was intense, but honestly, one of the most fascinating sessions I've had in a while. It's funny when you're reading stories online, you can always sort of keep a little emotional distance. You're not there with the person, right? But when you're in the room, when you're standing in the dark, watching someone say they're being scratched, pushed, touched, it's a different thing entirely. Middleton Hall really surprised me. I've been in places that feel more active on the surface, places with constant knocking, footsteps, all of it. But this one had a different weight to it. It was quieter, but the moments we did get were more personal, more targeted. There was an intent behind them, and that's the part that really lingers. The photos, especially the shadows that showed up in 2 and then disappeared, still freak me out. And the comment through the Estes, "You saw me earlier," I mean, it might mean nothing, but it might not, and that's the part I can't quite shake. There's something very strange about being in a place where people are getting scratched, where EMFs are reacting, where responses are lining up across different tools and methods, and then the energy shifts just enough to remind you you're not imagining any of it. Whatever was there with us, it wanted to be noticed, and I think it was. If you're curious about joining us on a future investigation, we're actually heading back to Middleton Hall on the 11th of October. We've got plenty of other events coming up before then too. I'll pop all the links in the show notes if you fancy coming along to see what it's like for yourself. And that is where I am going to leave things for today's show. If you're sitting there thinking, oh my god, something like that happened to me, or if you've got a creepy story of your own that you've been dying to tell someone, I'd honestly love to hear it. You can send your stories to beth@cursed-curious.com or just come and say hi over on socials. I am at Cursed Curious on Instagram, TikTok and Threads, all the good stuff, and Cursed X Curious on X because someone got there before me and I'm still not over it. If you're enjoying Cursed and Curious so far and want to help it grow, you can head to the Patreon at patreon.com/cursed-curious. It's still early days over there, but I'm putting together bonus content, early episodes, and hopefully some fun extras for the truly curious. And finally, thank you. I really mean that. It's just me over here putting this all together, and knowing there's someone on the other end listening makes it all feel a little more magical. I'll be back next week with more stories to keep you up at night, but until then, stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay haunted.